May 2018. Far away from the English-speaking world, all the way in Central Asia, in an unmarked town on the border between Kazakhstan and Russia, a review comes in on Google Maps. This review is harrowing. At only 9 words long, it packs incredible efficiency. It is a review, it is a story, and it is a cry for help. It reads, "Never visit this city. Please, do not go here." As a review, it answers nothing and leaves us only questions. Who is this? Where is this? And what happened here? Google Maps is probably the most groundbreaking invention of my lifetime. Like, the ability to see and use road maps and satellites from anywhere on Earth is insane. It's absolutely insane that we can do that, and I can't even fathom not being able to do it. Like, the idea of using a physical map is completely foreign to me. I rely so much on Google Maps for everything. I used to have a job, and I would go from my home to my job, and sometimes I would drive. And to drive there, I would have to go drive down the street I lived on, turn left, drive for about 20 minutes across the bridge, and then I was at my job. And every day before I did this, I would use Google Maps to check my route. And it was always the same route. Obviously, it didn't change, and it was only one turn, but I would always do this. I don't know if it was more of a ritual or anything else, but I assume that if one day I didn't do that, I would have taken a right turn and gone off into the lake. And it's not just me. Google Maps and Google Earth have been game changers for people who aren't dumb as well. In 2005, conservation biologist Julian Bayliss found a previously undescribed rainforest on the side of an inaccessible mountain in Mozambique. He did this using satellite images provided by Google Earth. And then a few years later, he did it again and just found another rainforest on an inaccessible mountain. It turns out Mozambique is just loaded with those. So, clearly Julian has been more prolific with these than most people would have. I've never discovered a rainforest, and most people haven't, and he got 2. But he's not the only scientist that uses this. All sorts of scientists use Google Earth and the incredible wealth of satellite imagery it provides. But I want to talk about a few other examples, and not just scientists. A notable one that you may have heard about is a guy by the name of Saru, who was separated from his family when he was a kid. He got on a train when he was 5, and it went away. He ended up getting adopted by a different family, but years later, I believe 25 years later, he actually found his childhood home again by using Google Earth images, right? And eventually he found the train station he was separated from, and then eventually found his family. And, things went fairly well for him after that. He wrote a book, made a movie, you may have seen it, called Lion. And all of this was only possible, again, because of Google Earth. So clearly, I'm just using the most notable and extreme cases of this. Most people aren't going to discover, their long-lost family or an ancient civilization because they used Google Earth, right? But I think there are a lot of little discoveries that you can make. Like, you might not make the news, but click around on Google Map or Google Earth in your area and you're sure to find something interesting, right? Like, a few years ago, I was clicking around my city and I found there was a small little green patch behind a couple of car dealerships, which usually means some publicly accessible or maintained green space, but this was very, very tiny and nestled behind a Subaru dealership, so I didn't think much of it at the time, but I actually eventually did make my way out there, and lo and behold, it was a graveyard with graves dating back to the 1800s, and it was pretty cool. Again, nothing as dramatic or significant, but it was neat. The point of this is that I like Google Maps, and I like to look at it. I look at it all the time whenever I need some geographic context for something specifically, and it was... This actually came about when I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to an episode of The Omnibus with Ken Jennings and John Roderick, and it was while John Roderick was describing the border between Kazakhstan and Russia. I don't need to go in the context there, he just was. And I'll play the clip. It sounds like this.
If you actually look at the border, if you kind of take a close look at the border between Russia and Kazakhstan, you'll find that it is like a Minecraft border. It's a series of almost like randomly generated straight lines instead of a natural flowing. It doesn't go according to any sort of latitudinal lines. It's really like a Lego border.
So I'm following along on the map as they talk about the border, and I'm immediately intrigued. And particularly, I noticed there's this one bit that looks like a peninsula from Russia into Kazakhstan, and I zoom in on it and find a town, completely unlabeled. But to my surprise, a Google pin pops up showing this place has been reviewed and has a 1-star rating. I suppose the 1-star rating wasn't very surprising, but it was surprising to me that people reviewed it at all. And so immediately 2 reviews pop up. And this is the part of the video where I have to talk about Griffdog. I'm not excited to talk about Griffdog82, but it is necessary because he's the only other review on this operating cache desk. Griffdog82 has 9 reviews, and they all, I'll go through them. He has 2 reviews in North Korea, one where he says he was forced to work in a Russian labor camp because he didn't like the curry, another one where he says it's the best Korea. He has a review for a park in China where he says the United States should take the park. He has a review for like a place in Timor-Leste where he says Russian hackers live there, although he's never been there, and the Russians are planning to invade Australia. I don't want to call him a troll because I don't think these are intended to deceive. I think he's just clowning around. But the point is that he has a bunch of obviously insincere reviews like this one up here where he says a McDonald's in Florida is very nice. And that's Griffdog82. That's all we need to know there. ZapZap88, on the other hand, is a completely different story. They are a local guide and have almost 200 reviews. Now, only 2 of these reviews have come in the last year. One of them was the review in question. Another is a somewhat entertaining story about drinking lake water at a place called The Lakes. But nearly all of their reviews are 2 years ago, and I think this would be when this person was trying to take advantage of the local guide system. Essentially, by putting a bunch of Google reviews for your local area, Google would reward you with points and things that you could use for other stuff, and ZapZap was really going for it. They had a lot of reviews for a lot of places. I didn't read over all of them because frankly they're kind of boring to review reviews for places you have no frame of reference for, but they reviewed all sorts of places like fast food places, and Denny's are frequent targets of ZapZap. And ZapZap's reviews, again, on a cursory look, I didn't go through all of them, but they don't give a lot of 1-star reviews. Like, they seem to be pretty easygoing, and they like a lot of things, even when things like aren't particularly good. Essentially, this is a review service that ZapZap was taking seriously and trying legitimately to use. So I personally doubt that ZapZap was trying to do like some trick or a joke with the Russian review. It's just completely out of character with the rest of these things. The only thing that gave me pause on that front was that it isn't all lowercase, and that doesn't fit in with the other reviews from 2 years ago. But then I did find this review of a Denny's in California, also rated 1 stars, with the same "do not go here" in it, which to me seals the deal. These were written by the same person. But this raises another problem, and if you've been paying close attention, you may have already spotted it. That Denny's wasn't the only review in California. Every review was in California. ZapZap88 is a local guide for California. They have 197 reviews in the state of California and 1 review outside the state of California. And that review is in the middle of Siberia for a small, unmarked town on the border. And this gives me trouble. So what's actually going on here? Well, the first thing that jumps out is that maybe this is the first time ZapZap has ever left the country, or even the state, and they ended up here in the middle of Siberia, which seems unlikely to me for obvious reasons. The other idea is that this person's actually a world traveler, but has never had an incident notable enough that they deigned to make a review, which, given the number of reviews they make at home, seems unlikely to me also. In fact, it seems less likely than the first option. So maybe they came out here for a specific reason, but it's still a very odd place to go. And not only is it an odd place to go in a general sense, but the spot on the border it is even stranger. It's unmarked and there's nothing of notable significance there that I can find. So I looked around the area. I thought maybe if you end up on the border, it's because you're traveling between 2 other places. And the 2 largest cities in the area are Omsk and Astana. So I set to researching these two cities, but this proved something of a rabbit hole. And I'll start with Astana, the purpose-built capital of Kazakhstan. Now, Kazakhstan is a country that is very rich in oil, so Astana has been something of a project to show off its power and wealth. As a result, the city has a lot of very impressive but somewhat chaotic architecture. Look, here's the world's largest tent. This 150-meter high display of decadence features an internal shopping mall, park, boating river, and indoor beach resort. This is the most developed part of Astana, a city so strange it leaves people unable to describe it in words other than strange and weird, like some sort of Lovecraftian horror city. I can't do it justice in my own words, so just watch this reel. Astana's commitment to dystopian architecture is so strong that its peace and reconciliation pyramid appears to be modeled after the civilization call to power AI entity. But Astana isn't particularly representative of the region. It's strange because it stands out, a sort of emerald city peering out of the steppes like some kind of mirage. So we're going to turn our attention towards Omsk. Now, if Astana is strange because it is rich, empty, and soulless, and lacks history, Omsk is very much the opposite of this, but still seems to be pretty strange. Doing research on Omsk is difficult. Not a lot of people travel there, and the people who live there don't usually speak English, so a lot of the media you find is either translated from Russian or is sort of vague. I was able to pick up a few things, mostly in the way of pictures. There's not a whole lot of context or descriptions for why things happen in Omsk, and there's a whole lot of wink wink, nudge nudge, you know how it is sort of attitude from the text I could find. These images come from a few different places. Some of them come from Twitter, some of them come from blogs, a lot of them come from one particular page I found, but all of them seem to have the context of discussing Omsk as a particularly unusual city. The only place where things like this could happen. The phrase, "do not try to leave Omsk," comes up a whole bunch, and that, together with the pictures, paints a kind of distressing image of a city. The saying actually comes about because a lot of people are trying to leave Omsk, but the high cost of travel and the small number of economic opportunities makes it very difficult. History doesn't reflect much better on Omsk either. It operated as a fairly high-profile political prison in the 1800s, and during the Soviet years, a number of gulags were operated out of Omsk as well. Essentially, throughout history, if you lived in Omsk, there was a high chance it was not by your choice. Oh, and there's one other thing I have to talk about if I'm going to talk about the international reputation of Omsk, and it's called Omsk Bird. This creepy little bird figure garbed in red is everywhere when I try to look up this city. I don't really know what to make of this. Part of me feels that it was a meme that may have started in Russia but really caught fire of the international community. There's a self-mythologizing aspect to it. It's hard to really find out what the cultural basis of it is. It's often accompanied with drug-related imagery, but I'm not sure if that's connected to the Omsk proper or just what people imagine when they see the surreal images associated with the bird. It's very difficult. I think one of the things that really gave me trouble here was that it's one thing if a city doesn't have a reputation, but for a city to have a very prolific reputation that is incomprehensible, there's no defined meaning, it seems like the people who already know about the meaning find it funny, but they don't but it's not explicit what it is. Like, this is really what was confusing me. So I actually reached out and talked to a person who was from Omsk to figure this next bit out. So I found this Ask Me Anything About Omsk, but it was old and largely failed to capture the interest of anybody, so there weren't really relevant questions or answers to what I was looking for. But the guy was still around, so I messaged him and we got in contact. He didn't have anything particularly spicy to say about Omsk. He insisted it was a pretty mundane city despite the odd reputation it might have. He did mention a few things, though: the relatively high cost of living, the low number of career opportunities, and the poor city management over the years. But none of these things made it particularly strange or unusual, just sort of a depressing post-Soviet industrial city. He said that things were getting better in Omsk all the time, though, and that the images I had found were just cherry-picked, or potentially not even from Omsk at all, but just associated with the city because of its reputation. A reputation that he said it developed in the 90s, when things were truly dark. But I wasn't just here to ask about Omsk. I was particularly interested in that unmarked town from before. He said he had never been there specifically, but he did give me a name. Not quite sure I know how to pronounce it, but it's there. Finally, he left a few cryptic words about the state of small villages such as that one, saying that there was no guarantee they were safe and they were plagued by rampant alcoholism. Knowing what I now do, it's not too surprising that somebody would have a bad time here. This is a region that has been through a lot. During the Civil War, it was a place of power, housing a provisional government before getting conquered by the Red Army. Under Soviet rule, this region was the target of forced migrations, people getting separated from their homes and their families and moved into Siberia. In the Second World War, people fleeing from the front lines found their new home in the booming industry of the region. And as the Cold War progressed, the military was ever present, and they hid away their darkest secrets of the steppes, like gulags and military testing. Finally, it all fell away with the collapse of the USSR, and they were left with nothing. The jagged and rough-cut border now divided families along arbitrary lines controlled by hard-nosed and corrupt bureaucrats, while oligarchs divided and dissolved the industries left behind. Everybody was out for themselves, and crime and alcoholism were rampant. I still had questions, though. Luckily, there was one man who could answer them. It took me a little bit to find a good way to contact him, but once I did, ZapZap88 messaged me back, and he told me that he visited this unusual spot because his relatives lived there, and he had terrible experiences when he was 3 and 8. Going out on a bit of a limb, I'm assuming that the 88 in his username means he was born in 1988, which would have put his 2 visits around 1991 and 1996, and that's when things were about the worst in this region. Huge spikes in alcohol poisoning, suicides, and crime peaked right between his 2 visits, and were indicative of a whole larger problem happening. I could have asked more questions to find out what happened specifically while he was there, but I wasn't interested in prying further, and my curiosity was satisfied. I have no real end to this video. I just need to grab a quick shot with a giant red arrow for the clickbait thumbnail and we're done. See ya!